Welcome back and thanks for staying with Africa News Network First Fast Live. Finance Minister Gigaba says South Africa is on the right economic growth path and the country needs to take advantage of renewed investor confidence. Gigaba says the economy will exceed its growth projection, which has been revised upward to 1%, higher than the 0.7% at last year's medium-term budget. Now, economic growth is now projected at 1.5% for 2018, rising to 2.1% in 2020. Several measures will be taken to radically transform the economy, including allowing new ideas and businesses to thrive.
The 2017 GDP growth projection has been revised upward to 1%, which is higher than the 0.7% expected at the time of the MTBPS last year. We are anticipating growth of 1.5% in 2018, rising to 2.1% in 2020. While this is a good start, there are immediate policy interventions that we need to make in order to ensure that we create the right environment for investment, growth, and employment. The first is to finalize the 14 confidence-boosting measures that we committed to in July last year. After several years, during which economic growth undershot our projections, we now see the improved growth projections for 2018 and subsequent years as a floor rather than a ceiling. We are convinced that as business and consumer confidence return, and as government follows through on its commitments to enable growth with prudent, fast and decisive action, we can exceed our growth projections. We need to provide investors with the certainty required to increase investment. Raising the level of investment and improving the ease of doing business in the country will support job creation. Private sector investment and job creation are critical to reducing unemployment, which remains stubbornly high at 26.7%.
I don't look at the budget for disappointments. I look for what will make the country better. If the money is spent on investing, on improving the state of the country, I'm happy with that. Therefore, South Africa competes with a number of other developing countries. If we're improving our competitive advantage, I'm satisfied.
Transformation calls for more than growth alone. It requires a fundamental shift in the way that wealth is created and shared. The structure of the economy needs to be transformed radically to allow for new ideas, businesses, and economic activities to emerge and to thrive. By deconcentrating our economy, we are radically transforming the structure of our economy. Furthermore, there is continued collaboration with our social partners at NEDLAC to improve the country's investment ratings and accelerate economic growth.
What we've got now, I think, is indications that there's hope. And that hope means that while the growth number is put at 1%, that is seen as the floor, not the ceiling. If we do a few things right, we can add to that level of growth even this year. I think that's the important point. So what he did was that he provided a number of policy tools to enable us to do that.
And joining us in studio is Faith Ngwenya, Technical Executive at the South African Institute of Professional Accountants. And we have Miboni Morgan, a Managing Director at Kumo Promotions, Adil Nchabileng, Transform RSA President, Tsepo Khadima, Political Analyst in studio, and Professor Jenny Rousseau, Head of Wits School of Economics and Business Sciences on the phone. Good evening to all our panelists, and thanks so much for joining us. Just very quickly, a reaction from you. I'll start with the ladies who coordinated their outfits today. I'm not sure whether this is a fashion statement or a start of a new political party. We'll start with you, Mem Ngwenya. Your reaction to the budget vote.
I think all in all, it was a good budget, especially if one is considering the level from which we were approaching it, where we are sitting with a huge deficit. So I think the minister did well to try and balance it. Was it enough? not necessarily. I'm sure my colleagues will actually just agree that it wasn't enough to obviously address some of the areas, especially when we are talking radical economic transformation. We do not yet have a plan exactly as to how are the finances going to fit into that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What does it speak to specifically in terms of black business, Moiboni, in the challenges and breaking the barriers to entry, ensuring that there is success or higher success rates among black SMMEs?
Okay, in terms of breaking the barriers, it's a good thing because we'll be able to have entry. But the issue that I have is that, well, the budget speech was well delivered, but in terms of implementation, we also have an issue of timelines. You know, that when would that be done? So that on our side as business people would say that we are expecting change in this period for us to get moving. So that has a lot to do with timelines. So I think I'm a bit disappointed actually when it comes to issues of timelines.
And I mean, also, I think the policies are a good deterrent for anybody wanting to get into business, as we can all collectively say that it takes a lot of jumping through hoops, almost chasing your tail, sleepless nights, you know, indebtedness and all sorts of things that if we talk about reform, Rakhadima, and the triple PFA, in the 90-10 or 80-20 split, that in the consultations, what would be to the advantage of black business? And of course, we're talking about those that are already in the running for government tenders, etc.
Yeah, I have to say that, by the way, I think it was very nice for the minister to say, we're going to be all right, we're going to be all right. And I looked at that and I thought...
You just lost your composure there. I've never seen you do that.
But it was William Shakespeare who said that an unmet expectation is the chief source of heartache. And for black business, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. They are going to be in for a greater disappointment. So for a long time, there has been talk about repealing of triple PFA. Now we have a bill that we understand will be before Cabinet next month, March. However, what is missing in all of that, and I made this point last year, interestingly, there's been a departure in terms of how to assist black business, not empowered business, but black business. Last year, when Pravin Gordhan was in position, he made mention that 30% of government procurement, not state procurement, of government procurement would then go towards black business. And at the time, I made mention that it would not be possible that even come the end of this financial year, and in March, we would not even have spent 10% of the 300 billion rand that, the 150 billion rand that was set aside in terms of the 30%. And the chief cause for that has been that the banks have not followed suit. We sit here today, we saw the banking sector that has been very exuberant on the new administration and what they expect to be, and all of those platitudes that were effectively espoused by the president, we are not seeing the banking sector backing up. So even if you've got the procurement bill, public procurement bill, that comes to Public Procurement Act, and you set aside, unless you have got the banking sector that can provide pre-shipment, pre-production capital, which is working capital for the black business, it is going to be near impossible. So it's one thing to say, I'll pay you within 30 days. But without a bank, because even all of big business, by the way, is reliant on the banks to provide working capital. So that is what I find missing, and that's why I'm very unhappy about it. And lastly, I want to say, the issue of debt still worries me. We sit here today, in terms of the new revised numbers that they've given us. Think of it this way. Eskom's daily turnover is 485 million. 485 million a day. Our debt is 493.
I just want to deal with one item at a time, and we'll come back to the rest of the challenges plaguing primarily small black medium enterprises. Professor Jenny Rousseau, head of Wits School of Economics and Business Sciences, is on the line. Do we have a ballpark figure in the last financial year as to how much was spent on black procurement in government, Professor Rousseau?
Good evening. Good evening to the panelists. We do not have exact figures along racial lines of government expenditure, or for that matter, general expenditure in the economy, because the figures are not recorded in that way, it is virtually impossible to do it because it would make statistical collection just too complicated. When you get data from big companies, the cost to the economy will simply be unbearable.
But isn't that exactly the reason why, you still have certain reports, depending on your source, that the JSE, for example, has got a 30% black majority, or rather representation, when in fact it is more black compliance, and that also applies to government businesses doing or getting tenders from government, that they are compliant but not necessarily black in the African black sense.
Well, again, if you talk about the JSE, it is important to note that large chunks of the JSE, of course, are owned by pension funds. And then you will have to drill down into pension fund membership composition to try and get to some ratio of black ownership, white ownership in individual companies through pension fund holdings to get answers to these questions. I'm not saying it cannot be done. It would probably be the topic of a PhD to get the real statistics.
Okay,
so I'm talking about extensive research to make progress in this matter.
Yes, thanks. Just please stay on the line. Is there a need then for more research and development or investment therein, so that we know what we're talking about and what we're comparing the opportunities based on the companies that are in that space? Adil?
Yeah. Thanks a lot, and good evening. Cindy, I think maybe let's go back to the recap of the budget. There are a couple of things that are critical and were key and are missing. One is there was no mention about the mineral sector, really, which is the primary economy in South Africa. Secondly, there was no mention of the state bank. There was no mention in terms of the reform directly from Treasury in terms of intervention on the South African Reserve Bank. Very critical intervention that is required. The other aspect of it is speaking to what we've always been advocating, that free education is possible in South Africa and can be provided by the state. I am glad that they have actually rolled out a much more comfortable plan that actually speaks to how free education is going to be a reality and how it is implemented from 2018.
And I don't want to interrupt you, Adil, but in the interest of time, because we spend the better part of the day dissecting the speech, I want to speak about black business and what the speech talks to. So any SMEs, whether you own a car wash, a hairdresser, or you have a technology company, what does this budget mean to you?
On black businesses, and we must be very specific, we must stop even calling it black business. Let's talk about the creation of a black economy. We already know that there's a very strong existent white economy which is currently being ridden on the backbone of white monopoly capital. When you speak about the black economy now, we start talking about black people emerging now as major conglomerates that are building new realities, particularly new industrial programs, where if we are talking about the SEZs, those SEZs must be primarily occupied and actually on the backbone of promoting black-based businesses as well as industrial opportunities, whether it is in manufacturing, it is automotive, whether it's to production economy, whether it's to do with agriculture, whether it's to do with anything that actually produces goods and services. That is where the incentives should actually be applied. And again, we are not talking about creating black economy on the basis that black businesses are starting to start new cities as well as new hubs of production and economy. That is the reality if we have to start.
Okay, those are the creative ideas he was talking about. But practically speaking, let's say from the South African Institute of Professional Accountants, how many or how much business do you get from the state, be it as members of the auditing firm or whether you are the main contractor, or is it mainly supplying the labor? How much business have you had?
With us, it's obviously our members, because as an institute, you have got members, and members themselves would be getting business. And I must say they are not getting a lot of business that's coming from the state, primarily because you have got the Big Four, and the Big Four will be taking a chunk of the business that we have. It's only now that we are seeing the small and medium-sized practitioners and firms that are now rising to the level where they can actually get like big contracts. But I just want to come back to one of the statements that was made by the minister on the assistance that is going to be going to the small and medium-sized businesses. My worry there is that it is between the Department of Small Business Development as well as the Science and Technology. And really, if you are looking at science and technology, we do have black businesses that are sitting in that space. But they still need a lot of development before they get to a level where they can actually be competing for the projects that we have got, that the ministry has got currently. So I do agree with my colleague here that we obviously are not going to get that being escalated down to black businesses.
But I mean, set-asides, and then we have designated groups, we have all sorts of other interventions, including departments that are specific, let's say in this case, for small, medium, or small business development. If they themselves are not adequately resourced or equipped, or do not have the blueprint, as to how to assist a small business, Moiponi, where are the professionals advising, or what kind of advice would you be giving the minister to consider?
Okay, I think in terms of, I'm going to just, before I get to you, just support into what you were saying, because that's the discussion that we were having earlier on. The 2.1 billion that's been allocated, it might end up with the science and technology, half of it actually, or maybe the small businesses might end up with maybe 10% of the money, because basically small SMMEs, they're not prioritized as delivered in the speech. They propose a budget, but actually it might not benefit us as small businesses. So I think there must be a shift in terms of focusing on black businesses, most especially the startups, to also get funding without having to struggle in terms of entry. The budget must also be allocated fairly, to say, because we are creating jobs. So it goes back to creating jobs. It's not for only people that have been established.
Yes.
It's for people that are actually just starting up.
Yeah, but realistically, the challenges that we face as well, as you were saying, Tepo, about indebtedness, not just the sovereign debt, but also as SMEs or individuals, when you are in business, the compliance that is required is such that you must have not an impaired credit record at least, or be under debt review, or have a judgment against you, albeit that you may have a watertight business proposal or proposition. Add to that the lack of operational capital. So how does today's budget speak to those challenges, primarily for black business?
Well, essentially what you need to do is to rewrite the rules, and the rules when it pertains to procurement. The banking sector, which is very concentrated in the very few hands, and that really has got zero interest whatsoever in the plight of black business, that is a lost cause. So what we need to do is we need to rather amend legislation, or bring about legislative reforms specifically on ensuring that when the state, and not just government, the state, when it procures goods and services under the program of a set-aside, and I think that the 30% is a very good start, to say 30% of state procurement, meaning whether it's Eskom, Transnet, or a government department, or a municipality, 30% must go to black business. When you do so, ensure that, therefore, you provide mechanisms of funding in terms of pre-production and pre-delivery finance. Then you do away, by and large, with this issue of say, I'll incentivize, I'll pay you within 30 days. Because within 30 days, that 30 days, there's a cost of money to it, and the banks are not there, even in the first instance, to give that. So unless we amend, or we bring about those legislative reforms, it's going to be impossible for us to achieve even 10% of the government procurement that can go to black business. So I think, for me, I'm disappointed, to say the least, that doesn't seem to be a mechanism that has been devised. Yet, this is a problem we've been running with for over many, many years. The other thing, of course, is that what is the meaning of the privatization of state-owned companies as far as transformation? particularly in terms of ensuring that procurement can go to black business. Because private sector, we have never been able to convince them to procure goods and services from black business. So now if you are taking even state-owned companies and privatizing, it means therefore that black business in this country is going to continue to be relegated to the bottom rank, and that cannot be desirable for socio-economic and socio-political stability, which we so dearly need.
All right, let's, before we let Professor Rousseau go on whether, as the Minister referred to the problematic evergreen contracts, whether we'll see a shift in the complexion of the business that is operating in state-owned enterprises.
Yes, indeed. I foresee a total restructuring of state-owned enterprises. It's long overdue. State-owned enterprises have been mismanaged for a long period of time. And of course, as part of that, one would want to see an audit of their procurement programs, their procurement policies, and want to see new contracts being entered into, because it seems that in some instances state-owned enterprises had really not been served well through current procurement contracts.
Okay, that's at least on a hopeful note, but we'll leave it there with Professor Jannie Rousseau, head of Wits School of Economics and Business Sciences, on the line, and we'll wrap it up or continue in studio in how we market our businesses as well. Let's say, for example, there is an opportunity to supply coal to Eskom as a new entrant, and there has been this long-standing relationship with 4 or 5 particular companies. What are the chances, on the basis of just the supply chain management, of that new entrant being able to put in their 49-page document of a tender and show all the requirements and stand a chance? Let's be realistic.
The chances are zero. Simple as that. Black companies do not have that capability. I mean, just to price a tender today will cost you at least 250,000. An emerging company that is competing with the likes of, for instance, major established companies that have budgets that are just set aside for pricing, for proposing, giving proposals to us tenders, and for running a 6-month leg, waiting for a job to be from tender to the point of appointment, and actually from there on to actually starting the execution of the job. So there's a slim chance of seeing black businesses really kicking off, unless there is some particular miraculous stimulus, which we haven't heard of it yet. We're hearing about grants that might be given, loans that might be provided, as well as support incentives that will be given to small businesses. But there is no clarity in terms of speaking to the creation of emerging black businesses that requires 3 to 5 years leg assistance in order to become stable as operators, as product developers, as well as suppliers. So the current scenario of hoping that black businesses will be created, Cindy, out of a vacuum whereby they have to compete with big business does not exist. That is why we make a key reference to the aspect of set-asides. When we say set-aside, government must take a decisive decision to say 30% is not going to be out of a contractor that has already been awarded a bigger contract who will contract out 30%. No, 30% of government budget must be given to black businesses that are emerging, that will be given opportunities to start, operate, as well as execute successfully a job that is being
But there are areas of excellence or pockets of excellence, examples where black business is thriving, albeit under difficult conditions, maybe through collaborations or partnerships, JVs, etc. I want to speak about Kumo Promotions, because we often, when we engage with our analysts, we don't talk about what your business interest is. We're more looking at the analytical overview of a particular situation. And we'll come to you, Tsepo. Let's start with you, Mpumi.
Okay. In terms of the Eskom entry.
And business, your challenges, your ability to access opportunities.
Look, I think the issue is when a client has already signed up a contract for 3 years with one person, one company, it gets very difficult for you to, to go through that and get and offer service, and which is a bit unfair, because when you say you are transforming the economy, you need to also prioritize new companies, even those that you haven't done business with. So it does not matter how much experience they've got, but it's a sign of saying that we're supporting small business. Even if it's the first time a client approaches you, because we're talking about Kumo Promotions. If I were to approach Eskom, for instance, I'm expecting them to give me an opportunity to offer service without actually looking at those that they've been offering, awarding the contracts constantly, because it doesn't empower us as young small businesses. It actually says we'll still suffer, we'll still go through the same struggle, even though there is transformation, but we don't feel it, we don't see it actually. So it's a bit disappointing to find that there are people that eat. Recession doesn't affect them. Restructuring doesn't affect them. It affects small businesses because, you know.
Yeah. Can we now hold established business accountable in what the minister had said and use this almost as not legal tender, but something to say you are obligated to subcontract, even if you are the main player who's more established, but as a designated group or cooperative, we demand, you know, an opportunity in that particular deal.
Yeah, we can hold them accountable if there is a set rule to say that if you are awarded this amount of tender, you need to subcontract to support small businesses, because also it helps them to carry some level of weight, so it elevates them to the next stage, so they could be able to, you know, move maybe to other stages or other amounts.
I want to talk about the practicalities thereof just after the break. We'll continue our discussion with our esteemed panelists. That's a Faith Ngwenya, Technical Executive at the South African Institute of Professional Accountants, Red Sepo Khadima, Political Analyst, Muiponi Morgan, a Managing Director of Kumo Promotions, and Dylan Chabeling, Transform RSA President. To stay with us, we take a quick break. We'll see you shortly.